Hello, it's Scott Manley here with episode 86 of Interstellar Quest. Sean Locke and Billy Bobkus Kerman are sitting in the Highlander. They are on Minmus, but they are not anywhere near the Highlands. Indeed, they are on some of the flatlands. But that is their next destination. They have solved their fuel harvesting problems, and you can see them filling up on liquid fuel. Because of the way Interstellar works, you get more oxidizer than you do liquid fuel, because it presumes that liquid fuel is in fact hydrogen, which actually, isn't such a bad presumption. But regardless, we are going to be taking this thing somewhere else. We're actually going to be headed in the direction of those hills somewhere over there. Presumably, there's a good chance of finding Highlanders up this way. We're going to look at this plateau, so we hook a bit to the left there, or rather we move a little westwards, take some information, take some science readings while we're actually flying over the surface, because of course we are here to get all the science. That is our brief, that is what we will do, and that is what we will not return until we have finished indeed. And when I say we, I mean Sean Locke and Billy Bobkus. It's not as if I'm actually controlling their actions. They are entirely doing this themselves, channeling themselves through me, one might say. That actually sounds like a cool idea for a scary type video game where you imply that the computer is in fact controlling you to control it, or some meta thing like that. Regardless, the journey was quite easy, but old me is about to discover he'd forgotten something critical. And touchdown off the Highlander on some part of Minmus, which isn't a flatland. Okay, so begin initializing the water extraction and the fuel refinement while we actually start to set ourselves up and do some science. Wherever we are, it's time to do science. So begin the materials bay. While the samples are processed, you turn your thoughts to how much Minmus looks like a mint dessert and discover that you are hungry. I think I might have had that one before. And the mystery goo starts to bounce slowly from top to bottom. And that is from the lowlands, so at least we know where we are now. Okay. So now we have some experimental data. It's time to get these guys in the lab so that they can actually process it. The lab needs 2 occupants, and that's what we have. We just have to move them in there, and oh, isn't there supposed to be like a right-click option here to like clean up things and collect data? That's confusing. And I have no right-click menus, actually. Oh, wait a second. Do I need to have, like, crew in the capsule to get the right-click menu? This is uncontrolled, that's what it is. Yes, if only older me had thought about including a probe body or an extra crew member so that the science lab would actually be useful. Well, never mind. Let's get on with the science. You look up at the Highlands and wonder out loud whether you could jump over them. Mission Control advises you not to try. Okay, so we collected a bunch of data, get that back into the lab so we can, do whatever we want to do with it. But right now we want to collect it and fire up my RCS pack. It's kind of hard to fly when you don't have the RCS pack enabled. In fact, given the position of the engines, of course, on the RCS pack, it should actually just send you spinning head over heels all the time, because they're clearly offset from the actual center of mass of a Kerbal. Although, to be fair, maybe I'm not understanding the exact mass of a Kerbal. Perhaps Kerbals actually incorporate negative matter into their bodies. Probably not. And you look up at the Highlands and wonder, wait, no, this is another EVA report from the lowlands. You take a handful of snow, ice and dirt and put it in your sample bag. You hope the science team in Kerbin will figure out what it is and why it is unfit for consumption. I still think it looks like pistachio ice cream myself. Flag goes up, and Flag says, "This mission is not going well." So yeah, we need to figure out how to actually run the lab, and I do have a plan which involves traveling to the refinery, the other refinery which has a probe. Then I can connect the 2 vehicles via a fuel pipe, and in theory that would then give control of the lab to the probe body which is on the refinery. So we can actually still do this, we just need to keep flying back to that refinery every time we want to reset experiments. Now, moving even deeper into space, we come to the Duna Express. Archibald and Lanber, who still is calling himself Sean at this time, they find themselves flying towards Kerbin right now at about 900 meters per second or thereabouts. I mean, the orbital velocity is 10.1 kilometers per second, but that doesn't factor in the relative motion. So I think it will arrive at about 1 kilometer per second, and we'll have to kill that velocity. And conveniently enough, if I look out the window, there we can see Kerbin and the moon doing their celestial dance against the smudged background of stars. See, the thing about sky maps is, or texture maps for stars, is that real stars, they always appear points at practically any resolution you can view them at. So simple skybox textures with stars painted on them inevitably look bad when you zoom them in, because real stars don't behave like that. As you zoom in, you see more fainter stars. But they never resolve themselves. I mean, even the images of stars that have been taken have used some quite fancy techniques. It's not as simple as getting a really big telescope and zooming in a lot. Aha, and I noticed that our periapse height is now 80 kilometers and we have a negative apoapse, which means we are in the Kerbin system. The Duna Express will sling by Kerbin and then disappear off into interplanetary space once again. Obviously, we're going to perform a capture maneuver and then rendezvous with Space Lab 1 in orbit, or at least that was the official plan. But the boys back at Kerbal Space Center think that it's time that Archibald Kerbin knew the real truth. So he's given special orders to take all the science over to the lab on its own, while, of course, Sean is left in control of the spacecraft. Sitting alone in the habitation module, he is able to be addressed frankly and truthfully by the mission control. They inform him of the substitution of Sean Kerbin with Lanber Kerbin and order him to take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that Lanber does not return to the surface. But while this cozy conversation is ongoing, suddenly the engines fire up. This module has no instrumentation, no controls or anything. Alone in the command module, Lanber Kerbin is able to initiate a deceleration burn, dropping the spacecraft's periapse inside the atmosphere, and then, at the critical moment, he detaches himself, leaving the engines firing. Archibald inside the habitation module, unable to turn these things off. He is also unable to leave because attempting to step outside of the habitation module will put him right into the middle of the exhaust gases of that engine. Also lacking any control systems, Archibald can do nothing but sit by and watch as the spacecraft turns randomly in response to the stresses on the spacecraft bending the mountings that those engines are sitting on. Over time, it does seem to stabilize in one direction, with the spacecraft burning radially outwards away from the sun. At this point, Archibald Kerbin is unable to stop the engines and unable to direct the spacecraft in any meaningful way. So instead, he just has to wait for some time until the engines finally run out of fuel, and whatever orbit he's left on, he is going to have to be rescued. Thankfully, he does actually have several hundred days worth of life support to keep him going. Hopefully we can send someone out in the meantime to rescue him, bring him home, and perhaps even bring the spacecraft home. Of course, by then, Lanber Kerbin will have made it back to the planet Kerbin. He is on a straight line back into Kerbin's atmosphere with whatever secrets that he has actually acquired. On this orbit, Archibald may be the first Kerbal to get as far as Dres and return. Of course, there is that minor problem of Kerbin not being anywhere near where he'll be when he returns. The one upside to all of this is that because this was a Duna mission and because it already lost one of its crew, then Archibald does in fact have a lot of food and a lot of snacks to keep him entertained and sustained in the time that it's going to take to return. Now, with Landber's surprise change of tactics and trajectory, it means we have no vehicle in the vehicle assembly building which we can build and launch in time for it to intercept. However, we do have the asteroid diverter spacecraft currently attached to an asteroid sitting over Kerbin. Now, Lars Kerman is a science advisor. He's not really a pilot, but he's the best qualified individual. In particular, he's the only person on scene with a spacecraft which is capable of capturing this capsule as it flies past at relatively high velocities. Now, this B9 cockpit is awesome, incidentally, but don't let those doors on the side fool you. The way you get in is through the top. You just step over the top. Oh, and apparently I'm stuck. No reaction control, no rotation, no mouse control. Okay, so he's just kind of stuck there. He's not responding. This does look a lot like the bailed out glitch, which I so love to document, but unfortunately hate to be actually hit by. So, maybe if I slide the spacecraft backwards, I can get him near the hole, the port. So if I decouple, then we do start moving backwards ever so slowly, which means the ladder is actually moving closer to the Kerbal, so I just need to be in control of him at the appropriate time. Come on, is that him? Yes, come on, boost, board, yes! Lars Kerman on board the asteroid rediverter and ready for business. We have a decent amount of fuel, we have RCS for extra thrust. We are gonna do great. Oh, what a beautiful shot, of course, of the sun and my epic hardware ready to pluck this space capsule out of the sky. So, first thing we really want to do, if we're going to be aggressive, we're going to try and flip into the right plane. I'm mostly doing this, even though it does need a lot of fuel. I did the plane correction first when it's least efficient, because it does actually simplify setting up the maneuver nodes to make sure that we can intercept this. Anyway, so to correct the inclination, I'm going to need to start thrusting upwards initially, or north, so to speak. And then once we get past the kind of 50% position on the board meetings, then it's okay to actually step out at that point, some might say. Okay, so early on in the cycle, we're low down. We do actually need extra thrust, so what I can do is use some of the RCS thruster fuel to give me higher thruster levels. So yeah, we go from about 15 to about 48, so it's a factor of 3 higher, more or less. And that'll help me early on when I really do need to be as aggressive as possible. I'm not sure I can put this spacecraft into the capture orbit and rendezvous inside the 24-hour time limit that I've accidentally set myself. I didn't deliberately set a 24-hour time period. That's just what ended up happening as a result of the numbers. It's actually a lot less time, if you remember, than I had when intercepting the asteroid. Of course, the upside is that this capsule is a lot lighter than the asteroid and should be a little easier to capture it and actually slow it down and put it into orbit. Unlike that asteroid, which took about 20 orbits, if I remember correctly. It also helps that since then I've actually deployed a number of power relay satellites, so I'm pretty much able to get 1.2 gigawatts almost anywhere in space around Kerbin, even if I do need to adjust the pointing of those dishes periodically. And once I get around the other side of the planet, then of course I need to flip the direction that I'm thrusting to make sure that I continue to decrease the descending node, or the relative plane inclination here. Now, obviously, if you are wanting to do this in the maximally efficient way, you don't do your plane corrections low down. But I really wanted to just use the huge amount of delta V that this thing has and make all my plane corrections early and then go and just plot the encounter, which was not that easy in the end. The system that generates the close approach approximations tends to work best when you've got two relatively circular orbits. When you have a hyperbolic orbit and a highly eccentric orbit, I pretty much am only getting the encounters right where the node is crossing the two, when the node is at the same position as the two orbits intersections. And that meant that as I was going outwards, I needed to keep on adjusting my plane to keep these things close enough that it would be generating the close approach calculations. But eventually old me does start to get close. Okay, intersection time is about 18 hours out, which means that I'm going to have less than 6 hours when I actually encounter it. 6 hours to get up to speed, rendezvous, clamp on, capture, and then put into a safe orbit, because we really don't want the asteroid diverter going down through the atmosphere. It's not designed for that, and it probably will die horrifically if I try that. Okay, got my encounter, 97 kilometers, time to shut things down and begin the actual voyage outwards. What a beautiful shot there, of course, with the poles, the aurora, and the moon sitting right over everything. It's rare that I've got a spacecraft at such high latitude, going over, essentially it's going up at a 45 degree inclination, so the chance of seeing the moon over the south or north pole is actually a lot lower when you're on a plain old-fashioned terrestrial holiday. And we've lined this up so that we will go out, pass through Apoapс, and then be falling back towards Kerbin when we actually have to start making course corrections. We'll probably need about 1 kilometer per second of course corrections, which this spacecraft will easily offer. The real question is, will it be able to do it in the time required, or will we find that the maneuvers I need are going to take 3 to 4 hours? Well, one way to find out. Just do the darn thing. Of course, here we get to watch the spacecraft as it travels outwards. There, we've passed through Apoapс and we're now starting to fall back down. And Lanber and the Duna Express capsule will now come down and start to catch up with us. When it gets close enough, that will be when I start making the course corrections, which will be more like a mad dash to make sure the thing doesn't fly by me at 800 meters per second. So the engines now come online, more or less accelerating towards Kerbin, because the capsule is going to fly past us, and we need to actually get up to the same speed as it. It's rather like a relay race, except with giant grabber claws. So the real question is here, can I accelerate fast enough, or is it going to zip by? And I totally guesstimated when I was going to start. If I find that I'm running out of time, then of course I can switch over to the monopropellant and enjoy the 3 times extra thrust. That may not be enough to save me if I mess it up. Also, because we're picking stuff up off of Earth, it turns out that we actually have a lot of places we can run as relays to receive the internet radio. Now we're inside 100 kilometers. This is more like a standard rendezvous. Of course, we're 80 kilometers out and we're moving at 80 meters per second, so we allow it to get a little more closer without slowing down. Now that we actually have a better handle on the speed, we're not being so cautious. We have 2.5 hours to actually complete the rendezvous. If we can't get the rendezvous and get the spacecraft out of the impact trajectory, then both spacecraft could be lost, which would not be a good thing. Okay, at 1.5 kilometers out, we've reduced our velocity to about 15 meters per second, which means it would take us about just under 2 minutes to actually get there, for those who can't do basic mathematics. But I doubt that many people watch this channel without at least understanding basic arithmetic. And there we go, 200 meters out. We will, of course, have loaded the capsule. And now, once we get close, we'll reduce the velocity to 1 meter per second. And it will be up to us using the grabber. Okay, so we got to line up this thing right at the front. I have the object already selected as a target, which is nice because there's not really any way to select the target while inside the command module. Okay, there we go, 70 meters out, moving in ever so slowly. We can see that the planet Kerbin is coming up behind us, but it's over 2 hours out, and we're moving in maybe at 1 kilometer per second. I'm not sure at this point. But yes, Landber Kerman's brief moment of freedom is about to come to the end, as the first-time pilot Lars Kerman expertly maneuvers the asteroid diverter. Of course, from this angle, Landber can't even see he's being approached from behind. That was Lars making a good decision on how to approach this target. And contact! Target is captured. And now it's captured, we just need to bring it into orbit safely and, well, rescue Archibald Kerman at some point. But until the next time, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.